Hey, it's Kevin with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. And on today's episode, I am going to be joined by Joel Wayment, and he is the Vice President, General Manager of 3PL and Packaging Solutions at Cardinal Health. And we're going to dive into a little bit about what Cardinal Health does, if you're not familiar. But we're also going to talk a little bit about his role and the relationship that they have with 3PLs and dealing with the logistics of pharmaceuticals and some of the complexities there, maybe some of the differences between other types of products, and also a little bit about, how things have evolved within that industry, especially on the logistics and warehousing side. So, Joel, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thanks, Kevin. No, I'm good. It's good to be here.
Definitely happy to get you on. Happy to dig into this and learn a little bit about this side of the world, side of the industry, I guess, and dive into it. So, tell us a little bit about, I guess, Cardinal Health first, for those that are not familiar. What does Cardinal Health do?
Yeah, you bet. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that Cardinal Health does, right? And so, I
Mm,
think most folks that maybe have heard of Cardinal Health have heard of about, Cardinal Health as a wholesale drug distributor. But I will tell you that is one facet of many different things that Cardinal Health does, right? So, whether it's wholesale distribution of pharmaceuticals, or in medical devices, they're a manufacturer of medical devices. They really touch all aspects of healthcare, right? So you think of Cardinal Health, the thing to think about is that Cardinal Health is essential to care because we're
mm,
touching many different areas that make up the healthcare system.
mm. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And obviously a very essential, like you said, and vital part of what goes on, not just in the supply chain, but in the world in general, right? To be able to support people through whatever health things they have going on and keep them healthy, right? Which is really important. So now tell us a little bit about your role. You're the Vice President, General Manager of 3PL and Packaging Solutions. So tell us a little bit about what does that encompass and what do you focus on within Cardinal Health?
Yeah, you bet. So the third party logistics business for Cardinal Health really focuses on supporting manufacturers and helping them to bring their products to market. So once a manufacturer goes through the FDA approval process, now they've got to go through the logistics of it going from packaging, manufacturing to packaging to going to their customers throughout the supply chain. And so we help in that process, whether that is doing the physical storage of as well as the distribution of these products to their customers in the supply chain.
Mm. Interesting, and definitely, I think a little more complicated potentially than I don't know, like a pen, for example. I'm just looking what's close by me here on my desk. So, tell us a little bit about what's involved in that. Like, what differences from the logistics perspective, warehousing perspective, do you see when it comes to dealing with some of these things like pharmaceuticals, like you said, that need FDA approval? What are some of the differences versus some more common items or like
Yeah.
household items?
Well, I mean, as you can imagine, right, this is a very heavily regulated space. And so there's a lot of things that we've got to be mindful of. So, from the various temperatures that you need to store and ship these products in to how they're handled as it moves through the supply chain. And so, when you think about it, whether it's cold chain product, and in cold chain, you get products that are anywhere from 2 to 8 degrees Celsius all the way down to minus 196 degrees Celsius. So, you have
Oh wow.
the variation in temperatures, so that requires a lot of work and effort to make sure that you're storing and distributing those products in the appropriate storage temperature. So once it gets to the end destination and for patient use, the product is viable and there's no issues from that perspective. And so there are a lot of complexities to that as we think about it. And then you know, I will tell you that we've seen a lot of challenges and changes over the years, whether it's weather disruptions or other things that are going on that can impact what's
Mm,
happening in logistics. And so there is quite a bit of complexity. It's a little bit more involved than just saying you're moving, box from point A to point B.
mm. Yeah, yeah, sounds like it. And negative. You said negative
Negative
196 degrees
196.
Celsius.
Yeah.
That's insane. That's
Yeah.
that sounds so cold. So tell us a little bit about how do you make sure you have the proper controls in place to be able to keep up with some of these regulations and I guess not only just keep up with the regulations that are in place, but then I'm sure the regulations change over time too. So how do you make sure that you're staying up to date and then also making sure you're adhering to these regulations? Because in some cases, I imagine if you fall outside of, say, the temperature range, like
Yeah.
it becomes not viable anymore, right?
Right. I mean, we obviously, pay very close attention to the regulatory landscape and what's changing and evolving. And then we're looking at how does that impact our operations and what changes do we need to make, whether that's investments in new technologies and capabilities or processes to support the trends that we're seeing. And so, as an example, there's an incredible amount of growth and activity taking place with cell and gene therapy type products. Well, those
Mm,
products are ones that require the -80 to -196 degrees Celsius storage. And so, we're looking at what do we see is coming to the market? What does the future look like? And that then drives where do we need to invest as an organization? Where do we need to make sure that we're ready to support that? And then we work with a lot of teams within Cardinal Health around, whether it's quality and regulatory and other groups to make sure that we understand the requirements and what we need to put into place to comply with those to make sure that everything operates the way that it should.
mm. Interesting, interesting. And what goes? I mean, obviously that's a cold chain situation, right? But what goes into a facility that needs to support a product like that?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, you want to make sure that you've got a facility that's following, the good manufacturer practice and guidelines, right? So, you want to be CGMP compliant, but you're also looking at making sure that you're complying with, state boards of pharmacies and others that have specific requirements for how you run those operations in those facilities. But we also go, steps further in looking at other types of certifications like ISO certifications that ensure that we have the right processes and practices in place to produce the right outcome in the services that we're providing. So, we're going to constantly look at, what are we doing? What's best practice? How do we get to the optimal state to support these types of products in a way that makes sure not that we're just compliant with the regulations, but that at the end of the day, we have the assurances when a product gets to a patient that they know that product is good and viable.
Mm. Interesting, very interesting. And you mentioned there like kind of the cell and gene therapy kind of stuff, which is fairly new, right? So, I mean, as these new, because as Cardinal Health, you're not developing, right, these products, right? You're just helping to distribute and do the logistics for them. So when a manufacturer is looking at developing or they're testing a new product, I mean, at what point do you as Cardinal Health get involved to be able to, when that is like a viable solution that can go to market, you're ready to go? I mean, do you get involved with them early in the process, or how does that look?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on, the different divisions of Cardinal Health and when they might engage and work with the manufacturer, right? So there are
Mm,
some divisions with Cardinal Health that are working with manufacturers in their FDA filing processes and things of that nature. But for
mm,
us on the 3PL side, I'll tell you, we start to get engaged with the manufacturer as they're getting close to, coming out of their clinical trials, and they might have a PDUFA date of when they believe they're going to be, getting approval from the FDA. And so that could be 2 years out from launch. That could be a year out from launch. It just depends. But that's when we're engaging with them to understand what their needs are and the unique aspects of their products so that we can ensure that we have the right capabilities and infrastructure in place to support those products.
mm. Interesting, interesting. Yeah, because I imagine that it takes some time to get that facility up to snuff, right? To where it needs to be in order to support whatever those requirements may be. So we kind of talked about some of the requirements around it and what that looks like, but you're also in charge of packaging solutions as
Yeah.
well. So tell us a little bit about for some of these products, how do you make sure that, I guess, one, they arrive where they're supposed to arrive intact, right? And there's no damage or anything like that. But also, how do you utilize packaging
Yeah.
to maintain some of these, requirements like temperature sensitivity throughout the travel time of the product itself?
Yes, our packaging solutions, business is really working with manufacturers on that kind of whether it's primary packaging or secondary packaging. So as they are preparing to come to market, this is really kind of what does the box look like, and how does the product fit in the box, and what is the size of the box? So if you can example, a manufacturer may have a product that's got an oral dose solid, in bottles. Well, do
Mm,
you want 100 bottles in a case? Do you want 10 bottles in a case? What makes the most sense? And so we're working with manufacturers to help them design the right packaging based on who their customers are and where the product's going to be. when you think about shelf space and where that product's going to sit, what makes the most sense. So we're helping to design the right packaging, but that packaging also plays a crucial role of, hey, as this box moves through the supply chain, it's going to be touched by many hands. How do we make sure that it's, as it gets bumped along the way, that you're not creating damage to the product, and the
Mm,
product still looks the way that you want it to look when it gets to the end customer, and they're going to put it on the shelf prior to dispensing.
mm. Interesting, interesting. And are you utilizing any kind of like sensor technology or anything on these shipments or to track like?
So it varies, right? So a lot of times,
Yeah.
especially in the cold chain space, we work with
Mm,
manufacturers on, identifying the right type of cold chain shipper, that we're going to ship that product in, right? So a lot of times these are, qualified and validated shippers that will hold the temperature that's needed for a duration of time, whether that's 48 hours, 72 hours, or whatever the case may be. And so we work with manufacturers to make sure we're picking the right shippers that are going to provide the right outcome for those products that to have those sensitive temperature requirements.
mm. Interesting. Yeah, yeah. It's very interesting because you kind of, I guess, peel back the layers of complexity a little bit, right? It's much more to it than
Yeah.
shipping, like I said earlier, just shipping like some pens, right,
Yeah.
from Office Depot or something, right? So now tell us a little bit too, because as you mentioned, obviously essential, right? Whether there's a pandemic going on or whether it's just normal every day,
Yeah.
or I guess as normal as you can say our everydays are nowadays. But with that being said, I mean, you are essential, and health has become such a vital part of everything, and it's continued to evolve over time, as we've seen, as there's been more research, more development, and things like that. So tell us a little bit about, how does Cardinal Health continue to evolve as well, especially since the pandemic and these other kind of events that happen. How do you continue to evolve and make sure you're keeping up with all of that?
Yeah. I mean, not only are we paying attention to, products that are in development and going through the FDA process, but we're also paying attention to what's going on in the environment in the areas that we work, right? So, you know, do we have a lot of storms popping up in certain parts of the area? And if so, what are the things that
Mm,
we're doing to help mitigate some of those impacts of shipping products into areas that might have more disruption because of weather and different things? And so we're going to be constantly looking at what's happening in the market, and what we're also seeing on the drug development side, and then looking at, okay, what do we need to put into place on our side to make sure that we have the right solutions to support these new novel products that are coming out that are going to be going to impact patient lives. One of the things that's exciting for me is, as part of working with Cardinal Health, is that we know, all of our employees know, and the thing we talk about a lot is, I'm not just shipping a box that's got some shoes in it or something else. But
mm,
every box we ship out is going to impact a patient in a positive way, and not just a patient, but the patient's family and loved ones. And so we take that
yeah.
responsibility very serious. But that's what drives us to be focused on, one, making sure we get it right every single day, but also how we're preparing for the future for these types of products that are coming to market. Because a lot of manufacturers are doing some really neat work on developing drugs that are going to impact areas that are unmet needs for patients today. And sometimes working with products that the patient population may be less than 100, right?
Mm,
And so it's a very niche area, but again, to that one patient, that means the world to them. And so we're constantly focused on, okay, do we have the right tools, systems, technology, resources in place to support these novel products coming to market so that patients can live a better life?
mm. Interesting. Yeah, yeah, and that's a great point there about it, like you said, you ship a pair of shoes, and like, who does it really impact, right? Just the person buying it. Maybe their friends are like, "Oh, cool shoes," right?
Yeah.
And that's about the
To my
extent of it.
teenage
But
son, he would be very disappointed if his new shoes didn't show up on time.
yeah, yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure. But like you said, on the health side, right? There's a greater impact there. So there's more emphasis on needing it to be on time because it's
Yeah.
critical, right? Not just because it's a want in a sense, or a desire. So I'm curious in that regard, because you touched on there too, like, oh, there's an area somewhere where maybe there's a lot of storms going on, right? Or maybe it's like hurricanes or something like that. How do you I guess maybe shift some of your inventory, or how do you balance the inventory where, maybe there's an influx of demand for like medical supplies because something like that happens, right? How do you navigate that, and what does that look like from like your network perspective?
Yeah. I mean, so one, we're constantly kind of monitoring the various events that are happening across the areas in which we're
Mm,
distributing to, right? So it could be weather, but I'll also tell you we're monitoring, hey, when, you know, s- the team that wins the World Series, for baseball, where's the parade going to be? Because that's going to disrupt product movement in the supply chain. Or hey, you've got Mardi
interesting.
Gras coming up. What's going to happen to Mardi Gras, or whatever the case may be? And so we're monitoring all the events to understand, okay, here's how this could impact the supply chain. Then it becomes a matter of, okay, what do we do? Do we forward position product? Do we look at where we have inventory at other locations that can then move to other areas until the disruption is over? So we're constantly focused on, hey, what's the disruption? Where is it at? And then what are the possible alternatives to make sure the product continue to move through the supply chain?
Hmm. Interesting, yeah, and that's an interesting point about looking at like where's the
Yeah.
World Series parade. Like that's something I haven't thought about before, but that's a great point, right? Because streets are closed off, there's higher congestion, traffic, and things like that. So that makes a lot of sense to be able to look at that, and obviously a lot of planning going into that, right? Because as we talked about, a pair of sneakers, like maybe your son's upset they deliver a day later, right? But some critical medical supply a day later mean something pretty detrimental. So it's really interesting there. So I'm curious, like, to go a little further on like the relationship between Cardinal Health and the manufacturer itself. I mean, as maybe something interesting we can touch on is sometimes there's recalls and things like that, right? I mean, how do you go about that process, and what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, so fortunately, we don't have to deal a lot with recalls, but they do
Mm,
happen for various reasons. And so, we work very closely with the manufacturer on looking at what type of recall it is, what level it is, and how we help support them in the various activities that are required for that. But the relationship with our manufacturer partners is really, it is a partnership, and we spend a lot of time talking about what their ongoing needs are, how they see things evolving, and how we support in the various activities. We don't do everything in healthcare, but there are a lot of things
mm,
that we do. So we want to make sure we understand what the needs are and how we best meet those needs, and work with them to accomplish the goals that they have.
mm. Interesting. Yeah, yeah. I think it's really interesting to hear about, because it's such a, like we've been saying, it's such a critical thing, right, to be dealing with, right? That everything needs to be dialed in like so
Yeah.
well. So I'm curious, what technologies are you working with? What kind of technologies are you implementing to help you maintain some of those controls and things that we talked about earlier, but also making sure that you're still hitting these critical delivery points, and keeping up service levels to where they need to be.
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you that there's a handful of things that we're doing that we're working with our manufacturer partners on make sure we have the right solutions to meet some of those needs. So I'll give you an example. One is, there's a constant need and desire to have greater visibility and transparency into shipments as it's moving throughout the supply chain. So,
Mm,
we continue to evaluate and look at solutions that will help us better understand where the product is, but not only where the product is, but what's the current temperature and state of the product. Is the product in a container that's been sitting at a 45-degree angle for 10 hours? And that's a product that requires liquid nitrogen. And when you have a container tilted at 45 degrees for a period of time, it reduces the length of time that shipper has to hold the temperature. And so, there's technologies like that where you're looking at, not not only do I know where it's at, I know, like, has it been tilted? Is it upside down? Is it at a temperature that's not good for the product? And so that
mm,
then gives us the ability to look at how do we intervene and prevent something from happening versus reacting after everything's all said and done.
mm. Very interesting. Yeah, yeah, and I can see why that becomes so critical and so important, right? Because in a sense, right, without that, you have sort of a blind spot almost, right, to like
Yeah.
what's happening in between facility, whether it's the warehouse to the hospital, or warehouse to the patient, or whatever the case may be. Like, that kind of blind spot a little bit, but getting that, I think, gives you that additional visibility, like you're talking about. So how do you kind of take maybe some of that manufacturer feedback, and then implement some continuous improvement projects or projects to be able to meet that feedback and those inquiries, to be able to answer some of those questions they may have?
Yeah, so Cardinal Health is an operational excellence organization, right? So we
Mm,
spend a lot of time looking at and talking about whether it's, we call them black belt projects or Kaizen events, whatever the case may be, to understand what are the pain points or potential pain points based on the collective feedback we've gotten from our manufacturer partners. And then we look at those, okay, well, how do we improve those areas and make those areas better to minimize or mitigate those pain points in the future? So we spend time every year soliciting and gathering feedback. We call it, the voice of the client, from our
mm,
manufacturer partners. So we ask them a series of questions, understand what their current pain points are, but also what's on their mind. What are they focused on in the next, 3 to 5 years that we should make sure that we're focusing on as well. And then it enables us to make sure that we're aligning to the same things. And then once we are aligned, then we know like where we can go and focus our efforts on. And so I'll give you a great example right now. Most companies, if not all companies, have ESG goals. And there's a
mm-hmm.
lot of focus on, okay, great. We have these cold chain shippers that we're shipping everywhere, but that can create a lot of waste. And that can
Yeah.
create a lot of, stuff going to the landfill. And so how do we mitigate some of that? And how do we be better stewards in the communities and where we live and work and operate in every day? And so we work with manufacturers and partner companies on finding better sustainable solutions that are going to still deliver the right results, but minimize the amount of waste that we're generating as an organization. So, as an example, today I'm proud to say that our 3PL business, we probably recycle 90% plus of the waste that we deal with, and so we have very
Oh,
little
wow.
that goes to the landfill. But that's been a big focal point for us. Is here are we using sustainable materials that make sense in these communities that we operate and work in, and so that's been a big point for our manufacturer partners. They want to see better sustainable solutions and the industry as a whole is doing a really good job of creating better solutions that are out there. And so we're making sure we're focused on those things.
Hmm. Interesting, and that's great to hear that high percentage of recyclable things that you're doing there, and it's interesting you touched on kind of the packaging aspect, and especially some of these temperature sensitive things that require extra packaging, whether it's insulation, cold packs, things like that. Are you seeing, I guess, just around cold chain in general? I mean, are you seeing anything interesting in the evolution of technology there to help support some of these products? What kind of sticks out to you?
Yeah, no, we are. So I'd say one area that we're seeing is just the growth and the development of I refer to them as reusable shippers. So
Mm,
historically, you're shipping these products in what we call one-time shippers, which is it's a one and done. It goes
right.
to its end point. Now they've got to throw that box away. But now there are shippers that are being designed to where I can use that shipper multiple times, and that minimizes the amount of just waste that's kind of out there in the supply chain in general. So that's been really exciting to see the development of that. But then also seeing the development of these shippers that can last for longer periods of times from a temperature stability perspective. So now
Mm,
I've got a box that is good for 72 hours or over 100 hours, which is good because of the disruptions that we see in the supply chain where there's a delay because of a storm or whatnot that better protects the product for a longer period of time. So that's been really good. But the other thing that we've been focused on is how do we minimize just the carbon footprint in general? Like, how do we minimize the number of
mm,
trucks that are on the road all the time because of the activity that we're doing? And so, we developed a very unique network that kind of operates like a milk run. But as a result of that, that means there's less packages we're putting out, that are going to have to be destroyed or to be recycled. But we're also minimizing the number of the trucks on the road by having smarter, sophisticated kind of milk run operations that helps us consolidate freight where it makes sense, and then you have fewer vehicles on the road at the end of the day. And so we work with our manufacturer partners on identifying these opportunities based on the data that we see so that we can create better solutions that's one, better for the environment, better for the communities that we're working in, but also provide a better solution for our manufacturer partners to help them also achieve their own ESG goals.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting to hear how you're looking at that and going about that. And I'm interested to hear about you said the reusable shippers, right? So you ship these out, and then how are you creating, I guess, the circular there? Like, how are you getting them back to you to use again?
Yeah, so a lot of the companies that are producing these reusable shippers that we're working with, they kind of have their own mechanism and network of how they're
Okay.
tracking and getting these shippers back and making sure that they are still in the condition that they need to be reused again. And so, fortunately for us, we're not having to like monitor and track every single one and make phone calls to get those back. These companies have mechanisms in place, whether it's tracking devices or whatnot, that's telling them, hey, I've got X units there. And they can tell the customer, all you got to do is put on the curb and the carrier will come pick it up. And so
Mm.
they're managing those aspects of getting those shippers back to us for reuse.
Interesting, interesting. Yeah, yeah, because I can imagine that, you have multiple different places where these are going to end up, right? And it's like, how do you collect those and get those back? So it's interesting to hear about that, and I think that's such a great way to do that because even whether it's temperature sensitive stuff or just regular shipments, I think we all have a pile of boxes that
Yes.
that builds up every week in our houses, right? So seeing these reusable use cases and things and how people are managing that, I think is really interesting to help reduce the waste just overall, right, within the planet. So now if we look towards kind of the future of logistics and around the pharmaceutical and health arena specifically, what does that kind of look like for you? Like, what are you planning for, 5, 10 years from now? What do you think, your operations look like?
Yeah. I mean, so one, and we kind of talked about it a little bit, but it's how do we continue to increase the visibility of
Mm,
products in transit, right? Because in the days of past, like yesterday, right? It was, hey, I turned over to the carrier, I can get a tracking number, I can see where it was last scanned, but that's all I know. And so now it's about, well, I want more information. I want to know not only where it was last scanned, but is it on time? Are there
mm,
delays? What's the temperature of the product where it's sitting? How long has it been in that temperature so we can evaluate the stability of the product? And so I think providing more visibility into product in transit is going to continue to be a need that we see that the industry has. And so we continue to focus on making sure we're looking at solutions and ways to be able to do that and provide that level of insight to these products. Because as you can imagine, if you ship out a shipment, and let's just say that shipment is valued at $500,000, but when it gets to its end destination and the customer says, well, hey, these gel packs feel a little warm.
mm,
In the old days, it was like, okay, we got to scrap all that material. Well, that's a significant loss. So now by having the right level of visibility and data of the product in transit, now you can fairly assess, are there any risks to that product or is that product okay to
mm,
continue to be used for patients? And so that becomes an important aspect that we'll continue to focus on. But, I think the other things that we're going to continue to see is, again, sustainability will be a key priority and focus as it is now and will continue to be from that perspective. And then also, it's how do we get closer to the patient, right? So when you think about
mm,
logistics, right, you you may have a product that's going all across the United States here domestically, but there also is a point in time that logistics is becoming more, at least in healthcare, more than just where's the product and getting the product delivered to the pharmacy for dispensing. Now, in
mm,
some cases, you get the logistics of the patient and the logistics of the product, and you want to make sure that those kind of meet up together. Because for cell and gene therapy, your patient's coming to a hospital for administration, and you need product to show up at the same time for that patient because these products, when they show up, they're being stored in liquid nitrogen, right, at minus 196 degrees Celsius. Once that product comes out of the container, it's got a short shelf life. So it's got to
mm.
be used within a certain window of time. And so now you've got logistics of the patient as well as logistics of the product. And so I think we'll continue to see how do we get closer to patients and meeting the patients where they are and supporting them with these crucial products that they need.
Mm. Very interesting, and I think it'd be interesting to see how that evolves and how you do accomplish that, how to get even closer to the patient, and I guess for references, I mean, how big is your network right now? Like, how many facilities do you have? And
Yeah, I mean, Cardinal Health's got, I mean, a very large network across the U.S., of
yeah,
course, right? With dozens of forward distribution centers. On the 3PL
mhm,
space, we've got some West Coast operations. I'm based here in just outside of Nashville, Tennessee, and so we kind
okay,
of look at where is the most logistical, ideal locations to be to support where these shipments are going, and so we'll
yeah,
continue to look at where it makes sense to have locations within our network, but also it's like how do we best forward position product so that when it's ready for the patient, the product's there and you're not waiting 2 or 3 days for shipments to occur.
hmm. Interesting, yeah, yeah, and I think that's such a super critical thing, right? I mean, there's been so much focus on how do we get the latest lipstick or something in like 2 hours,
Yeah.
but the critical thing is really what what you guys are doing, right? So how do we get that closer and make that happen? So really interesting to talk to you here, Joel, and learn a little bit about the logistics side of the pharmaceutical and medical supplies and things of that nature, something that is truly essential and truly critical. So very interesting to learn from you and hear about what you're looking forward to in the future here and some of the evolution as well. So really appreciate you coming on the podcast here and sharing a little bit with me. If people are interested in learning more about what you do and the 3PL services and things of that nature, what's the best way to learn more?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a couple avenues. Obviously, you can find us on the internet, for Cardinal Health, third party logistics services or packaging solutions. But folks can also connect with me on LinkedIn. So they can just go to joel.wayment, at cardinalhealth.com is my email address, but they can find me on LinkedIn. There's another way to get to us as well.
All right, fantastic. And we'll definitely put all that information at thenewwarehouse.com as well as in the show notes so people can easily find it. So, Joel, thank you once again for your time on the show today.
You bet. Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate being on here. Thank you.
Hey guys, thank you so much for tuning into today's video here on our YouTube channel, The New Warehouse Podcast, and I appreciate you tuning in. If you liked what you saw, make sure you subscribe to our channel, and if you like this video in particular, make sure you like it as well. And if you want to get this great t-shirt that you see in the video behind me, Warehouses Are Sexy, head to warehousesaresexy.com and get your own.